Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're doing my attempt at sort of a desert warrior build. I kind of wanted to capture the sort of like Sandstorm kind of vibe, because I thought of the build name and I was like, oh yeah, the Sandstorm. And then I thought about how I really haven't touched on like the wind-based abilities that 4 Elements Monk gets, and I wanted to try and give it a go and just see like, can I make an effective build around the wind abilities, and can I make like a cool theme out of it? And I think I've been able to do that. This build in my testing, well, not as powerful on a lot of the usual encounters I do, mainly because a lot of these wind attacks focus on like bludgeoning damage, which things like the Steel Watchers, which I normally test on, resist. It did feel a little bit underpowered in some places, but against humanoids and other enemy encounters, it is actually very powerful. It's extremely defensive, incredibly hard to hit, while also being able to do large dollops of damage. The only issue is that it is very dependent on key points to really get the most out of all of its abilities, and while the equipment does help with that to some extent, this build isn't the strongest. And also I'm kind of testing out a new style of video today where I'm trying to make them a bit shorter, because I think sometimes my videos are just too long and I take too long to get into things, so I'm going to try and make this one a bit quicker. This is probably going to go up on like a Sunday or something and just kind of see how it goes, but regardless, let's get into it. So, I'm mainly going for all the way in 4 Elements Monk today, because I've never really done that before either, so I kind of wanted to see how much a fully single-classed 4 Elements Monk could get done. It allows us to get a few interesting things, like we get poison immunity, which is great. What else do we get here? We also get things like, the improved casting damage on some of our spells. For example, Fist of Unbroken Air now does a 40-10 of damage, can push targets back and knock them prone, which is always nice. We get things like Stillness of Mind, Slow Fall, Purity of Body, which I already went over technically. We get a bunch of stuff that feels pretty good in the moment. Again, 4 Elements Monk is more about the spell casting, so the big thing that you get in the later levels is the improvement. And also at level 11 you get access to some unique kind of 4 Elements spells. They're basically their own versions of like Fireball, Grant Flight, and Misty Cloud Form, like the Cloud Form, which we have multiple ways of getting, but I also kind of wanted to try it out. You don't have to go 4 Elements Monk all the way, but I found that with Monk it's very feat dependent, because it likes to have multiple ability scores in both Dex and ability score improvements in both Dex and Wisdom, and I decided to focus on Wisdom more than Dexterity, because again, this is a build more focused on actually using like the spells that 4 Elements Monk gets rather than just punching things, and either way we're still going to come out of it with a nice 20 AC, so I personally don't think that's too bad. Now, originally I wanted to use a Scimitar with this build, particularly Belm, again, kind of that that Desert Warrior vibe, kind of using a Scimitar, but it didn't really work out, because obviously monks don't get Scimitar proficiency, only simple weapons and short swords, and there's no race that grants Scimitar proficiency, and so I didn't really want to compromise on any other aspects of the build, so I had to come up with a solution. And since I made this build a human, I ended up going with the Dancing Breeze as our weapon. It kind of blends that idea of like using a quarterstaff or a scimitar into one. It is a finesse weapon, meaning it uses our dexterity, it's a +2, and it gets one of the things that I wanted from Belm, which is the Whirlwind attack, basically giving us like a tornado slash that goes all around us, allowing us to attack everyone around, making separate attack rolls against each, and doing a little bit of extra damage, which is nice. So Whirlwind attack, kind of what I wanted. We also get Brace Melee, sacrificing some of our massive monk movement speed, which we get a lot of because we're a max level monk to roll the melee damage twice, basically getting like Savage Attacker, which is really nice, and also the other standard weapon attacks. So overall, and also the Dancing Breeze, wind, it makes sense. You're going to see there's a lot of wind and like sky and land themed items here. Let's get into the rest of the equipment. So we've got the Hat of Uninhibited Kashigo. After we deal damage with an unarmed attack, the wearer gains a +1 bonus to their spell save DC until the end of their next turn. So basically, we hit with an unarmed attack, and all of our 4 Elements Monk abilities are going to be able to have a higher chance to affect our enemies. Not the greatest thing in the world, I mainly just wanted this for the looks, for the fashion. Feel free to change this out for literally anything else if you so choose. Again, I was kind of going for that warrior, like Desert Warrior vibe, and I couldn't get like the kind of headdresses, obviously, in this game that people who are in the desert would use to like stave off the heat, so I thought a hood would be the next best thing. Next up, the Cloak of Displacement. The other kind of vibe I went for with this build was a bit of like illusion stuff. So like being shifting, like the sand in the breeze type deal. So we have things that allow us to, turn invisible, we basically use Blur to grant disadvantage on attack rolls against us and be very, very hard to hit. So combined with our 20 AC, having disadvantage on attack rolls until we are hit makes us very, very hard to deal with by most enemies. Next up, the Garb of the Land and Sky. While using Patient Defense, we get in the effects of Blade Ward, so while not only are we less likely to be hit, if we do end up being hit, we're going to be, well, much more tanky. And while using Step of the Wind, your next attack roll has advantage and deals an additional 1 to 8 force damage and comes with a +1 to armor class. I had to use this outfit anyway, because again, it almost kind of has that kind of, like desert garbed kind of vibe. It's literally the Garb of the Land and Sky, the name fits for what I'm trying to do here, and the abilities that it does give us are quite nice. Again, a little bit dependent on the key point usage here, especially since a lot of the 4 elements monk spells are quite expensive, which is why a lot of people tend to look down on it as a subclass, but I think it works out quite nicely here. That extra D8 of force damage is going to feel really, really nice, especially combined with the Dancing Breeze or Flurry of Blows. Next up, the Gloves of Cinder and Sizzle. I mean, the desert is hot, so we might as well get a little bit of fire damage in here. These are great early game glove options. They're basically just going to give you a 1d4 of extra fire damage on all of your attacks, as well as the ability to cast Scorching Ray once per long rest. Yes, not short rest, long rest. Overall, this is just meant to be a flat damage buff, but if there's anything else you think you want to put in here, maybe like the gloves that deal force damage or something like that for like a less commonly resisted damage type, you absolutely could, so feel free to play around with this slot, but I felt like the extra fire damage was quite nice. I mean, hell, you might just want to throw something like the Helldust gloves on here, but I honestly think that something from this kind of class of gloves, design-wise, to get that kind of matching aesthetic with the rest of the outfit would definitely make sense. I'd probably recommend the force damage gloves from Act 3 once you decide you've had enough of these ones. And then finally, the Boots of Uninhibited Kashigo. Honestly, these are great for any monk build. They fit the vibe that I'm going for here, as they kind of match the rest of the armor set, and they allow us to do additional damage equal to our wisdom modifier with our Unarmed Strikes. So overall, it's just going to make us a lot more powerful. Now, I know in most of my videos, this is kind of part of the new video style. In most of my videos, I would spend time now going over the earlier game equivalent options that you could pick up for the items. I'm not going to do that in the video here to try and save time, but you can find them in the description below instead. Next up, the Amulet of Windrider. I always thought it was called the Amulet of the Windrider, but no, it's just Amulet of Windrider. This is going to give us access to a few more wind-themed abilities, such as Ride the Winds, allowing us to transform into a cloud, becoming resistant to all damage and gaining advantage on Constitution, Dexterity, and Strength saving throws until our next long rest. Interesting thing about this ability that I didn't actually know, and I'm not sure if this is a bug or not. It says while transformed, the target will not be able to attack, cast spells, or talk. This is not true. If you use this, you actually gain access to Unarmed Strikes, and us being a monk, meaning we can punch as a cloud. You'll see it in the combat footage. I managed to do it towards the end. I definitely don't think it's intentional, and that probably will get patched, but hey, it's a nice bit of synergy that can be around until it's most likely patched in September. Next up, also, it would give us Gust of Wind, allowing us to summon a strong wind that clears all clouds and pushes creatures back 5 meters, forcing them off balance. Off balance means they have a disadvantage on strength and dex checks, as well, and attack rolls against them have advantage. It is removed when they take damage or are helped. So it can basically, we can cast this and then use kind of our bonus action attack to set up for a easier to land hit, I suppose. Next up, the Shadow Cloaked Ring. Basically, whenever someone is in a lightly or heavily obscured area, we deal an additional 1d4 damage with both our weapon and unarmed strikes. A lot of people don't realize how often this comes up. Basically, all an enemy has to do is just stand in an area of slight shade, and this ring will go off, so it's pretty much a constant damage buff, especially during indoor encounters. And next up, the Shifting Corpus Ring, again, kind of leaning into that almost illusionist vibe, giving us the ability to step back into our own Sandstorm, and of course, fade from view with either invisibility, making us completely invisible, or blur, making it so attackers have disadvantage on attack rolls against us. This is a little bit redundant with the Cloak of Displacement, but you get the Shifting Corpus Ring a lot earlier than the Cloak of Displacement, because the Cloak of Displacement's from Act 3, but feel free to swap this slot out for something else if you so desire. I'll quickly go over the 4 elements monk spells now as well. Of course, we get our usual Flurry of Blows, with the added damage buffs that we have applied for our equipment. We also have the ability Harmony of Fire and Water, allowing us to, while not in combat, we regain half of our key points rounded down. For us, we have a maximum of 13, so that's going to give us about 6 key points back in between an encounter once per long rest, which is okay. Unfortunately, Open Hand Monk just basically gets a flat-out better version of this that's usable in combat, also heals you a bit, and gives you, what is it, like an extra bonus action for 3 turns? It's a bit nuts. Unfortunately, this ability feels really, really underpowered compared to Open Hand Monk, and it's one of the reasons why Open Hand Monk is considered so strong. But again, since this build is so reliant on key points, any buff that we can get to them can help, perhaps even using the Sentient Amulet instead of the Amulet of Windrider. Next up, Rush of the Gale Spirits. Basically, it does the exact same thing that I just explained from the Gust of Wind ability from the Amulet. It does the exact same thing, except it costs 2 key points. So, you know, this is basically a get one free per short rest, whereas this one uses your key points. Next up, Fist of the Four Thunders. Basically, just being able to summon a big blast of, I guess, thunder, but I'm kind of reflavoring it as wind, to be able to push enemies away from you and deal a bit of thunder damage. But the main thing here is Fist of the Unbroken Air, literally an air punch that you like charge up and fire out. The animation is really cool. It allows you to push a target back 6 meters and possibly knock it prone. Of course, prone means you get advantage on any subsequent attacks until it gets back up, and it has to spend movement to get back up. Also, dealing 4d10 bludgeoning damage is quite nice. That's a hefty sum of damage. Unfortunately, that 2 key point cost is a bit limiting. However, it is an extremely fun move to use, and I highly recommend giving it a shot. Obviously, we have the usual Monk's Stunning Strike options, as well as Clench of the North Wind, basically hold person for us. This is why this build is much more effective against humanoid enemies, because you can basically cast this, and then just go full-on Pound Town with your flurry of blows, your weapon attacks, everything, getting critical hits on every single one. Very, very strong ability for us, but again, 3 key points. It's a lot of resources to spend. This build is definitely going to be long rest dependent, unfortunately. I mean, well, no, I say it's long rest. This build actually does recover key points on a short rest, which again, makes me wonder why Harmony of Fire and Water exists in the way that it does. But regardless, because you can't even use it in combat, you just short rest after combat. I don't get it. Either way, you're gonna... Actually, I don't know why I thought the key points were restored on a long rest. How about a long day? So actually, this build is probably a bit better on the resource side of things than I realized, but again, in longer combat encounters, you're still going to have a bit of trouble. But otherwise, I still think this is actually quite a solid build overall. Going off the summit, big thunder damage, wind, blast, whatever you want to call it, it's going to deal a bunch of damage. It's basically a slightly more powerful version of Shatter by default, and it's quite nice. I quite like this. It's just a great way to deal with things like the Steel Watches if you need to, so it's pretty powerful in that sense. And finally, Ride the Wind, giving you the ability to cast Fly until your next long rest as long as you maintain concentration. Obviously, a lot better for map traversal than actual combat. You're going to be wanting to concentrate on other things during combat, but basically getting the ability to fly around the map at will is pretty nice. Obviously, the other one we could choose at level 11 of 4 Elements Monk would be basically the equivalent of this, but I figured it made sense to diversify a little bit here. So yeah, overall, a ton of wind-based abilities. Flight, being able to turn into the cloud, manipulating the winds into powerful strikes, or being able to push enemies around the battlefield, getting the whirlwind strikes, getting the flurry of blows, being able to use hold person. It all comes together in quite a fun and thematic package. Again, I really wish this game had more earth-based abilities, because I would have really liked to have used those here, but hey, we take what we can get. So for things like the ability scores, you're going to want to make sure you have Dexterity and Wisdom at 16 each. I put Constitution at 14 and Strength at 12 to kind of help with jumping around and such like that. Because we dodge things so much, we don't have to worry about our Constitution as much, as we kind of don't really get hit as much with this build, unless you're up against absurdly powerful enemies. In fact, maybe if you feel like the Amulet of Windrider isn't really doing it for you, then the Amulet of Greater Constitution might help you out a bit better there just to get some more health. Otherwise, take 3 ability score improvements, put 2 into Wisdom and 1 into Dexterity for the total stats that you see here. As for anything else, no, I'm pretty sure that is everything related to the build. You'll see the combat footage up ahead, and I'll kind of go over my thought process about how you should approach combat with this build. So, with this build, you're going to want to focus on using the gimmicks that you have to be able to manipulate the battlefield in the way that you want it. Making sure that you're not getting dogged on by multiple enemies at once. Use Fist of the Force, Fist of Unbroken Air to push enemies away from you. Use Hold Person to take an enemy out of combat and deal massive damage to them. If things are getting dicey, transform into a cloud and move away. If you're surrounded by enemies for whatever reason, use Whirlwind Attack to break them up and then be able to disengage in a different way using Step of the Wind. Being able to move out of the way, and being able to disengage, move out of the way, and if you use the other Step of the Wind to be able to get the extra force damage on your next turn, or if you feel like you just want to sit there and try and tank it, you can go for Patient Defense as well. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. Again, the only problem is this build is extremely key point dependent, and like I said in my testing, against some of the tougher later game encounters, it does fall a bit short, which is why this is kind of more I guess, of a video that I'm kind of doing maybe like as an extra bonus thing, because it didn't really feel as powerful or as good enough to be its own kind of full video. But I did want to kind of show off this concept, because I do think there is room for improvement here. I didn't go for it in this video because I feel like it would have become too equipment dependent, but you could technically try and twist this build into less of a Sandstorm and just more of like a Storm Monk, maybe going for that air and thunder vibe from the 4 element spells, but then also mixing it with Storm Sorcerer to get flight from casting spells. My only problem with that is the split resources. Again, you're going to have a low amount of spell slots and a low amount of key points, and you'll find that your resources are going to get drained pretty quickly, and I think you'll find you're spreading yourself too thin. And and like I say, when I test these builds solo, if this build was part of a team, obviously it would have performed a bit better, but I can't really gauge the power of individual builds if I run it with other powerful builds that I've made every single time. So on its own, this build is going to struggle, but if it's supported by proper teammates, it will definitely get the job done. In fact, I think this build with a Tempest Cleric and a Storm Sorcerer, maybe even a Circle of the Land Druid altogether, can actually be a really fun and thematic build party that could support each other with similar themes. You could have the Storm Sorcerer focusing more on thunder, lightning, and ice, while this build focuses on more like wind and thunder and such like that. The Circle of the Land Druid could focus on more of the kind of illusion spells, because the Circle of the Land Desert domain gets things like Insect Plague and Blur and Silence and all sorts of things that could be really, really interesting and helpful for the build. And Tempest Cleric is Tempest Cleric. That would kind of be your like big nuking option with, you know, its abilities. Could be a bit more of a frontline fighter because it gets that like reaction retaliation thing. I feel like you could pair this build with quite a few other sort of similar kind of themed builds with different classes to actually really get a lot of fun out of this build concept and have a really interesting party with a synergy and theme that's not often seen. Again, I really do wish BG3 had more earth and wind spells, or just features in general, because I feel like there's a lot of potential there for really cool build ideas that's just kind of missed. Again, really hoping that modding tools are going to make things a bit more accessible, because I will be making all of this shit myself if I can, so look forward to that. But anyways, in the sense of trying to keep this as a shorter video, I will cut it off here, because the combat footage was not very long, so I'm sure it's probably wrapped up, or at least is wrapping up by now. Let me know if you liked this style of shorter video with less in-depth information, but more of just like, this is how this is supposed to work, and obviously you can go and look at the wiki pages and such for yourself. And again, this build isn't the worst build I've ever made for sure, but it definitely doesn't hit the same highs as the other builds that I've made, especially more recently, and so that's why I wasn't sure if I wanted it to be its own full video or not. But hey, if you're seeing this on a Sunday, there you go. If you're seeing it on a different day, well, maybe I found it was better than I expected. But anyways, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.